Hello, everyone. We'll get started in just 1 minute. Thanks.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Depending where you are, good afternoon or good morning. I am Dr. Masika Jordan-Alston, and I want to welcome you to our session titled From Environmental Justice, Injustice to Restorative Justice, Returning Citizens from Toxic Prisons to Healthy Communities. Again, I am Dr. Masika Jordan-Alston. I'm an associate professor at the oldest HBCU in the state of Maryland, Bowie State University, as well as the CEO of APAC's Adams Transportation and Clean Energy. I'm honored to present alongside my co-facilitator today, Dr. Ufoma.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ufomo Vamida. I'm a postdoctoral research associate at the University of Arizona, and I'm a fellow for the Baker Fellowship on Climate and Human Resiliency. Really excited to co-moderate this panel today.
And this panel today will focus on exploring the critical transition from environmental injustice to restorative justice, emphasizing the experiences of returning citizens and individuals who have endured toxic prison environments. We will discuss pathways for reintegrating these individuals into healthier, more sustainable communities, highlighting the intersection of environmental justice, sustainable communities, and reentry efforts. This conversation aims to uncover solutions that ensure returning individuals are not only free from incarceration, but are also supported in their journey towards health, equity, and community restoration. Dr. Ufoma.
Yes, so to start, I want to orient us to the topic of toxic prisons, as not everybody joining us today might be familiar with the topic. So in general, this topic refers to the intersection of environmental injustice and mass incarceration. So thanks to activism led by incarcerated and formerly incarcerated people, as well as journalists and researchers, in recent years, there has been increased awareness about the intersection of mass incarceration and environmental justice. These are just a few headlines from different news articles talking about extreme heat, flooding, pests, proximity to landfills and Superfund sites. And while there's increasing awareness, this topic is still under talked about and underdocumented. And so I just want to highlight a few facts around toxic prisons from my own research. I spent my PhD using Earth observation data and other types of data sources to measure environmental burdens in carceral landscapes with a particular focus on prisons. So I just want to highlight a few facts that come from my own research in collaboration with other researchers as well. So for one, what we're talking about here is approximately 1,600 prisons in the United States, with the majority of them operated at the state level, followed by federal operated prisons. And according to census data from a few years ago, so this might be a bit out of date, but approximately 1.4 million people are incarcerated in US prisons, as well as over 330 staff work in these prisons. And this matters because so we have both incarcerated people and staff being exposed to similar conditions in some cases. Now, to talk about some of the environmental burdens, on average in the last few years, prisons across the US experienced outdoor air temperatures of 93.6 degrees Fahrenheit, or as high as 116 degrees, at least 10 days of the summer. This is particularly pertinent because 44 states in the US currently do not have universal air conditioning in prisons or universal heat mitigation plans. And this is amplified by different vulnerability factors that prisons experience. So in some of my forthcoming research, I studied prisons with characteristics that can make them more vulnerable to heat. And I found that several prisons with these characteristics also have higher heat exposure. So, for example, I found that prisons that have poor staffing conditions were hotter. The implication of this is significant because staff are often the ones who are tasked with implementing key intervention procedures, such as distributing ice water or providing access to respite air conditioned areas. And so, what I'm showing here in this research is that these vulnerabilities, coupled with statistically significant higher heat exposure than counterpart prisons without those conditions, may produce environments where the incarcerated populations experience increased heat risk in the absence of interventions. So another thing we can talk about is land surface temperature. Some people here are probably familiar with the heat island effect, which refers to the fact that cities with a lot of built up areas and artificial surfaces are hotter than background rural or suburban areas due to the absorption of heat from those materials. So prisons can be thought of as actually acting as kind of a carceral heat island because they're often built out of materials such as concrete, brick, or metal, which conduct heat and slowly release it back into the environment. In the example of this image that I'm showing here, the very red area versus the blue area has a differential of 19 degrees Celsius, which is 34 degrees Fahrenheit. And so you can see these buildings are absorbing a lot of heat, in some cases reaching 131 degrees Fahrenheit. And lastly, another thing that I just want to highlight is air pollution exposure. From this work, from my thesis, I show that in from an average from 2019 to 2022, 40% of prisons, so that's we're talking about several hundred, had worse air pollution than the rest of the US on average, with some having air pollution almost twice the US average. And so these are just a few snippets of the type of toxicity we're talking about when we talk about toxic prisons. And I'll pass it back to Dr. Jordan.
Thank you. And I'm going to share a few slides, and my focus will be on restorative justice and economic injustice. And I don't think we can have a conversation about environmental justice if we're not having a conversation about the economic impact of environmental injustice. They kind of go hand in hand. Give me one moment. When we talk about economic injustice, I remember being at and before I share the slides, I just wanted to share this quick one. I remember being at a conference, and it was universities from around the globe, all in the US, all visiting the US. And we were coming around the table to talk about environmental justice and economic justice. Environmental justice was a subtopic, but the major topic was economic justice and creating pathways for students from marginalized communities to engage in entrepreneurship and economic freedom is what I would call it. And I remember that me sitting in a room, and it was as if fire was shooting up my bones, because I remember sitting and listening to a researcher. And if you're a researcher, you hear researchers and you can dissect what the aim of their research really is when they talk about their studies. And I remember someone sharing in that space that they had created a tool, and the tool was to weed out whether individuals were fit for economic opportunities, so investments, and for them becoming entrepreneurs. And I remember hearing them say that the population that they work with, and I asked the question, tell me the breakdown, the diversity breakdown, tell me the ethnic background, tell me the gender breakdown, tell me, and the information came back that they were studying for middle-aged heterosexual white males. And this one tool was going to be used to identify whether the person from prison coming home was fit for economic opportunities, and they would have been weeded out. And I remember standing up, and I was the only person in that room, but I made sure I spoke, and I helped guide a decision that deterred funding from going for this tool, not because I wanted to weed out great tools, but because it wasn't. And so when we talk about environmental justice and we talk about making sure that opportunities are just, we do have to have it in a lane of not just what do we do with climate, but what do we do with economic opportunities within climate as well, because they go hand in hand. I'll talk about more of the collision between the two as I go over these next few slides. Just a couple of stats. And I know people are way more than stats, but I want to talk about these statistics because they are alarming. 37% of incarcerated individuals report mental health issues exaggerated by exposure to toxic prison conditions. I am a psychologist, I'm a licensed clinician. I understand the mental health conditions that many people come home from that have experienced in the toxic environments, the toxic prisons that they're coming from that we're supposed to be rehabilitating, but really a lot of individuals come home worse off than what they went in. And it's because of toxicity in the prisons, and not just climate toxicity, but environmental as a whole. That's a bigger conversation for another day. But 64% of inmates diagnosed with a mental health condition report worsening symptoms due to environmental conditions in prisons. I want you to imagine it, that you are sitting inside of a cell block. You're already behind. I want you to close your eyes and imagine this. You're sitting behind a cell block and you hear the doors close. You are locked into a facility and it's 113 degrees outside. There's no AC. You are burning up. Not only are you burning up physically, but emotionally, you're sitting inside of this place that is supposed to be restoring you, and it's not. It's doing the complete opposite. It is traumatizing. So there is a connection between the environmental conditions and your mental health. People have psychotic breaks, partly because of these toxic environments. 25% of inmates in prisons located near toxic waste sites develop serious mental health disorders due to prolonged exposure to environmental toxins. I could give a speech about that for probably 3 days straight, but there are chemicals inside of your body that trigger neurotransmitters. Those neurotransmitters will trigger mental health diseases if you had them in your DNA. So you may have an uncle, a great uncle 2 generations ago who had schizophrenia. It may never come up in your generation until it's forced to. And some of those forces happen when you're sitting in those 113-degree prison cells burning up hot. Those things can trigger neurotransmitters that trigger mental health diseases. It's not restorative. 75% of individuals, returning individuals come home with PTSD, report worsening symptoms after incarceration in toxic prisons. 56% of people of color, including justice impacted individuals, live near toxic release facilities compared to 30% in other areas. 18% of individuals' prisons are more likely located near toxic waste sites, and there's a 27% unemployment rate among justice impacted individuals. When we talk about the clean energy economy, where you're going to see EV stations that are going to have economic opportunities like Shell and Sunoco, but there's only 3% of people of color that are represented as owners in these spaces, and there's less than 2% of those people of color that are actually justice impacted. So when we talk about equality, we have to have a full scope of a conversation. And I won't go over this definition because I think Dr. Ufoma went over it well with the environmental injustice kind of intro that we already discussed, but I will mention this. The poorest neighborhoods often where these individuals return are 1.35 times more likely to be near toxic waste facilities. So not only am I living inside of one, I'm coming home to one because of my economic opportunities or lack thereof. Solutions. We can talk about solutions all day. I will mention one model, Apex Adams. The reason we started it, Apex Adams Transportation and Clean Energy, was to give Black entrepreneurs and people of color and marginalized individuals, justice 40 populations, opportunities to get into the clean energy space by writing a grant, securing funding, and pushing it to them and giving them the training necessary so that they could come home to better environments and stay home. One thing that I found when we were looking for alternatives to that terrible solution that I mentioned when I opened up is that there were individuals that were incarcerated for things like selling drugs on the streets, and they were great entrepreneurs. They were just selling the wrong product. And if you could take that same entrepreneurial IQ and turn it into something else, you would create economic systems that would change environmental systems in our neighborhoods. And that's what we're doing. Within 1 year, I'm also a founder of Black Wall Street. Within 1 year, we took 12 individuals who were returning individuals. And within 1 year, that cohort made over $1 million. That is economic justice that feeds into environmental justice as well. I'll skip over this piece, but if you have more information if you want more information about workforce development opportunities or hearing or being part of our free newsletter, you can scan either one of these codes. And I'm going to pass this over to our panelists to briefly introduce themselves. I'll start with BP.
All right. I am BP, B. Preston Lyles. I am lead organizer and project coordinator at the Toxic Prisons Campaign of the Human Rights Coalition, based here in the city of Philadelphia. I spent over 10 years incarcerated, and so I have very deep, abiding, and lasting knowledge and information about what it means to be a part of a toxic environment. And so we are working in Philadelphia and Pennsylvania to shut down toxic prisons. And we are working with, and I'm working with an organization that was founded by people who were incarcerated and their families and loved ones. But I am kind of a unicorn because I also hold 3 degrees, 2 graduate degrees, 1 terminal, and an undergrad. And so I'm excited to be a part of this journey with Ufuoma, who I am thrilled has moved into a next phase of her life. And I'm excited to be with this panel.
Thank you. I'm going to pass it over to Curtis to introduce yourself next.
Yes, so my name is Curtis Austin, and I am a justice impacted individual. I was incarcerated at the age of 22. I had actually just came home almost a year prior to that from a 30-year UFAC. I didn't serve the 30 years, of course, but then I was reincarcerated again at the age of 22. I did 16 years, came home at 38. I was actually I'm actually an ex-lifer. So basically, I had a long stint in prison. But during that time, I also made efforts to create a better environment, even while I was inside of the prison. So, which that work carried outside of the prison. So now I am the owner of Triumph Transition Solutions, where we help individuals that are coming home to be able to navigate safely back into the community and be able to adjust properly. The other thing that I do is I sit on the Lived Experience Council for the Department of Public Safety and Corrections. So by sitting on this council, I have a seat at the table to be able to change policies and what doesn't work, try to create better systems to make it work better for those that's inside on both sides of the fence. And now I'm also in the realm, or also have been in the realm of reentry. So because I'm in the realm of reentry, I'm also working to create pathways of employment, pathways of training, and pathways to a better and a sustainable life once individuals return back home. I'm honored to be here. I'm also a certified peer recovery specialist, which helps me and is a very great tool for me as I engage with individuals who have had like experiences. So I'm glad to be here. Thank you for allowing me on the panel, and I'm ready to get to talking about this situation.
Thank you, Curtis. I'm going to pass the mic over to Brian now.
Thank you so much, Doctor. Good morning, everyone. My name is Brian Pineda, and I'm the Deputy Director of Californians United for a Responsible Budget, or CURB. My immediate family is directly impacted by incarceration. CURB is a Black-led coalition of more than 80 organizations working to close jails, prisons, and migrant detention centers, getting people free and redirecting funds toward essential community services, especially in communities that have been hit hardest by racism and the criminal legal system. And my presumption is that people in this space are already familiar with the idea of a just transition. But for people who may not have heard the term, just transition seeks to ensure the substantial benefits of a green economy transition are widely shared with those who would stand to lose economically, be they countries, regions, industry, communities, workers, or consumers. CURB is calling for a decarceral just transition. So a transition away from toxic incarceration, recognizing that prisons operate as an extractive economy, much like big oil. Prisons extract fiscal and spiritual resources from California residents and people across this country and beyond. So we want academics, organizers, system actors, and the public to better understand how a just transition is actually impossible without addressing the incarceration crisis that we face, and be sure to integrate this framework into their research and advocacy.
Thank you, Brian. I'm going to direct this next question over to BP and to Curtis. I'd like to hear from both of you because you both had experience inside of the system. I'd like to hear from both of you about the challenges and realities of returning from a toxic prison environment. Can you share your thoughts on how either exposure to unhealthy conditions and incarceration affects the reentry journey? And what restorative justice and environmental health look like as someone transitions back into the community? You can tackle all of that question or parts of it, whatever you see fit.
You're up, Curtis.
Well, one of the things that Mfume talked about earlier was about the experience of being in a cell, as well as Dr. Jordan Austin spoke about as well, about being in a cell with extreme heat. So basically, one of the things that I don't like now is to be hot. Because I spent 16 years actually in a prison where it was times where actually literally it used to get so hot that you just have to just sit still. You just don't move. You just sit there because for the simple fact it's so hot is the be able to breathe it properly is even an issue because of how the humidity and how hot it is. And one of the techniques that we used during that time is at night we will open the window when the temperature dropped just a little bit. And we try to cover up the window prior to and close the window to trap the cool air in the morning before the sun came up to heat the cell back up the way it was. And we try to get the circulation of that air to continue to go on in the cell. And mind you, for a long time, I was in a single cell, but also then they had to shut down one institution and then they doubled us up. So now I'm in a double cell and now we both are in here. So that brings more heat in a small space. With that being said, you literally have to probably wash your sheets like 3 times, 4 times a week. Those are the times you take 3 showers. But you think about the individuals who have asthma. So I didn't have a breathing issue because I don't have asthma. But you think about the people that have asthma. To be in conditions like that is unhealthy. To be able to not to be able to breathe is a very traumatizing situation. So that was one of the things that contributed to the toxic individual. But also too, not just that, is also the medical resources that's there. A lot of times you can have a pain or a feeling or something going on with you, and they will get there. You'll go up to medical. If you put a sick call slip in, it might take you a week to get up there. But the situation is now. And then on top of that, if it's an emergency and you get up there, a lot of times they tell you they're gonna give you a ibuprofen or a Tylenol and send you back to your cell. I have known people that have died in their cell because of this very technique. So the situation as far as experiencing incarceration with toxic experiences and being able to transition and how it affects you when you come home, you still have lasting trauma from those experiences. So when you go to a doctor now, you hope you get the best care, but you don't always believe that really you're getting the best care. So what you do is you opt not to really go to the doctor. So some people think, oh, because you're a man, men don't go to the doctor. No, sometimes when you've been incarcerated and someone will tell you, oh, well, you need to make a doctor's appointment, go see your doctor. It's a mental thing that it's like, why would I go? But they ain't gonna do nothing anyway. They're not gonna really help me for real. So it's perpetuated from the experience that you formerly have experienced. So the second question was, can you repeat the second question for me? You're on mute.
It was an overlapping question. I think you addressed most of it, but I know you had mentioned also there were gaps between case management and reentry.
Oh, absolutely. So, especially on the spectrum where I was at, on the spectrum where I was at, because I was a lifer, it was actually ludicrous to me that basically, as you work a job, you're able to work a job where you can get 5 days or 10 days to get time off your sentence. But as a lifer, they don't really track your time. And when you go see case management, all you're just going up to see if your security level will drop, which should not be the case. That is not case management. Real case management is now that I engage the individual. I ask the individual, what are their goals? whether you're in prison or whether you're transitioning, you still should actually be operating in from a position of trying to figure out how to make this individual get to a destination that they desire to see themselves in. But if you don't engage an individual like this when they come in incarceration, whether they're lifeless or whether they're serving time or a number, it doesn't matter. It still should be the same protocol that you engage the individual, you find out what was their past, what they want their present to look like, and what they want their future to look like, and then you address that by making a service plan. In other words, to create a plan to try to get them to the place, whether it's employment inside the prison, whether it's getting them in a position where they got programming. So when they go back to court, if they ever get back into court, that they have things that they showed that I'm doing this. Anger management. I have been through anger management, that I've been through Alcoholic Anonymous, that I've done all these things. It should not be up to the individual that's inside of prison to rehabilitate themselves. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not separating that again from the individual to make a decision to change their life. What I'm saying is that case management should offer the opportunity to say, this is where you're at. How can we change your future in the way you see things right now? By providing proper resources and making a home plan. Whether that home plan, whether it might be 10 years, whether it might be never, but it still should be something that they talk about. It should be something that they work towards. It should be something that gives an individual hope. So the gaps is that they just get you in front of you. I look at a piece of paper. I say, well, okay, well, this is your numbers. You're not eligible to go to medium. You're not eligible to go to, okay, well, I'll see you next year. That's a big gap right there, because that is not how you engage an individual, a human being, because you truly have just treated them as a number, a piece of paper or document, and then you exit them out your office as if they really didn't exist. So when you think about this, how do you really better serve the community that you're supposed to be working for, and you call yourself a case manager? This is a toxic way of looking at things. It doesn't just go with case management and the individual inside. It's also because now that you have individuals that serve as officers inside of the institutions, these individuals do not have a rehabilitative type of mind frame. In fact, they are told to look at them at a certain way. They look at the individuals that's incarcerated as if they're really still the jury and the judge, which causes a problem inside of the institutions when it comes to relating, when it comes to communication, when it comes to compassion, when it comes to comprehensive understanding of individuals. It creates a serious problem in a toxic situation. And then when you see things on the news and you wonder, like, why in the world I'm going on? Let me stop here. I'm gonna pause on this, and I'm sorry, but I just got a little wound up. Here you go. I'm here in the back.
It was helpful to hear, and then I'm gonna pass this to you, BP, and if you need me to repeat the questions, just let me know. But I want to make a dotted line here, because a lot of times when we have conversations about environmental justice, we separate it from psychology. But there's a direct line between someone's mental health outcomes, especially for individuals that are going through the trauma of prison. And it's traumatic. And so you hear the conditions that Curtis just described, and you hear some of the solution to that. If we're talking about environmental justice, we also have to talk about psychology. We also have to create a better system for case management to address that. And part of case management is also education. So a lot of the stuff that Dr. Ufoma talked about in her presentation, that information isn't always available for the person sitting behind the bar, and they don't understand why they're suffering from A, B, and C. So part of a case manager's job is also to educate them on these things. So I think we have to look at it as a holistic approach. But BP, did you need me to repeat the question?
No, I have it. Thank you. So it is interesting. While I was in prison in Pennsylvania, I encountered a number of people that developed various sicknesses and diseases very early when I got there in the early 2010. And so as I got there, I met people who were having respiratory illnesses. They were having skin issues. Several developed cancer. So I've lost 2 or 3 people that I was fairly close to over that 10-year span of time. One whom I served very closely in worship with in the musical side of worship, and who died of stomach cancer. Someone else that I used to work out with died of lung cancer, and another person I know. So there are there are a lot of carcinogens in toxic waste and toxic coal ash and coal waste. So the prison that I was in Pennsylvania sits atop 50 million tons of toxic coal ash and coal waste, which is an astronomical number. And it's even more unbelievable that the Pennsylvania government would build a prison atop a site like this knowingly. So what happens is state governments, federal governments, these federal fund sites are sites that are in or near a 3 mile radius of a toxic environment, toxic land. And so governments tend to buy these lands to put prisons atop because the land is cheaper and because of the gross objectification of American citizens, of human beings. And so they build these prisons, they toss folk in there with mass incarceration, which really got its revival back in the late 70s, early 80s. But they began to throw people into these spaces because, as I've called it, prison has become the trash can of American society. And so because they objectify people, they seek to throw people away. There's an entire marketing scheme. So toxicity in the Toxic Prisons campaign involves more than just looking at carcinogens and dioxins and these things that people experience every day. Everything from rotted water pipes, especially in older prisons, to lead paint, to crumbling, not cement blocks of today, but cinder blocks of the past where coal ash was made for these blocks in older prisons. But there's also the issues of forced air, people not having enough heat or enough cold, people not being called down to medical when they need it, or medical treating not treating patients. Me and some friends of mine lovingly like to say, and I do say lovingly, although it's disgusting and deplorable, the reality is that it seems as if prisons hire physicians that are just getting ready to have their medical license stripped from them after so many complaints. They say, no, don't strip them. Give them to us. We'll take them. Or people that graduated last in their class. So there's a lot of mistreatment. And then there is the idea of the aging population. When you look at the data, what the data proves is anyone beyond the age of 45, and as it increases, they become less likely to recommit crimes, right? And the public they've fallen in love with this thing about people that sell drugs being the babies and the darlings of people who've been incarcerated. But the data shows that there are other populations that are far less likely to recommit crimes than people that have sold drugs. But the marketing has made one population the darling. And while we believe that everybody should have the right and should have the opportunity to live their lives fully, we also understand that the entirety of the carceral system needs to be stripped down and rebuilt from the origin. Because as you and I both know, the carceral system is a part of the white supremacist project. And it's been said that, well, I won't say that part, but the idea is that toxicity involves those multiple layers. And then let's also include the fact that a lot of times, at least in Pennsylvania, folk are sent hours and hours and hours away from their loved ones. And because prisons are largely populated by Black people, part of the deconstruction of the Black family, the deconstruction of society and community, also means you put impediments in place against families being able to connect, against families being able to visit, against families being able to love. What does that do? That further concretizes the psychological imbalances and disorientations to life. It further stabilizes for people a normalcy of the very things that are most abnormal for themselves, which is contact, community, emotional closeness, and emotional intelligence. So we look at these things, we look at also the power of relationships. So while there is a semblance of family that is built on the inside, the families that are outside are often left to tend to themselves, and people are forced to make decisions about whether or not they will eat or pay bills or buy medication, or send that money into prisons for the people that they love that are trapped inside of these concrete these concrete dungeons. So then all of that is a reality that the public needs to know more about and that the public needs to understand more of. And thusly, when you talk about people moving out from that kind of space and being integrated, at Toxic Prisons Campaign, we have firmly decided that there needs to be a remarketing. People need to know that everyone who is an American citizen inside of a prison is a human being, a full-fledged human being. And so most people, over 90% of people who are incarcerated have a date to come home, whether that's in 2 years, 10 years, 5 years, 20 years, or 60 years, or 80 years. Most people have a date to return. And as people who are American citizens, that old adage of everybody loving the story of an underdog and everybody loves a story where people can have second chances and all this. Well, we need to make that a reality. We need to make that real. And so, what we are seeking to do is to tear down these toxic prisons, to shut them down, and then to reimagine what prisons may look like, to reimagine what society may look like. And so, part of that for us means that when we're talking about coming home, we're talking about addressing public ideas and public opinions, public perspectives. So, we need to see Americans as Americans, we need to see people as people. Regardless of labels, regardless of what you might read online, regardless of what you may hear about somebody, we are talking about full-fledged human beings, and we don't know people's stories. But we do know that the judicial system is extremely corrupt. And so we need to recognize that. We need to recognize that people who may have committed the crime that they are listed for are often in prison for 2 to 3 to 4 times as long as they should be, even for that which they may have actually committed. And then we need to know that there's a very high number of people that are incarcerated falsely under every category. And so we need to recognize and respect that as well. And so we need to have a community that understands that our loved ones, our friends, our neighbors are coming home. And so people need places to live. They need viable employment where they can be self-sustaining and actually add to the financial stability of their families and their homes. They also need to be able to have environments where they can be freely themselves and where they can heal. And so there's a need to have opportunities for training and teaching, but there's also a need for authentic relationships to be put in place. Authentic relationships of genuine love, not objectification, not being used, not being seen as a number to meet a quota, but actual relationships where they can be safe and where they can be restored in their dignity and where they can have a proper space, a relational space where they can be redeveloped, re-engaged, and where they can feel fully again human, which is what prison strips from so many people.
Thank you so much, BP. I always really appreciate hearing from you, and thank you, Curtis, as well. I want to pick up on one of the comments you made, BP, about one, of course, the holistic toxicity of prisons, and deconstructing the carceral system all the way to the root. Because I think when people who might be traditional, maybe environmentalists or environmental justice advocates are learning about this issue, their initial solutions might be, well, let's fix up the prisons, let's add air conditioning, let's make repairs. But I
Right.
think the aspects you're bringing up about the holistic toxicity is so important to
Right.
why those things are not long-term solutions. Sure, we might have a prison that has air conditioning, but in those same prisons, sometimes they abuse the air conditioning to punish people in solitary confinement by blasting the air conditioning at uncomfortable levels. And then, of
Right.
course, you have, like you said, these abusive and negligent medical professionals in these spaces. So
Right.
these prisons cannot continue to exist with band-aid solutions, repairing some of these environmental conditions, because the system at its root is toxic, and all prisons are
Absolutely.
toxic.
All prisons are toxic.
So I just wanted to emphasize those things.
Thank
And
you.
related, so on this topic, I want to pass it to Brian, who's really working on this very issue of of preventing us from just continuing to invest more money into the prison system and thinking about how we can move forward. So the question I want to ask you is, could you share examples of things that CURB has advocated for funding that work to move us away from toxic prisons and towards restorative and transformative justice?
Yeah, thank you so much. And it was so great to hear you folks talk about your experiences, because, you know, we're real people and our communities are in really significant danger. Just to offer some context, after decades of advocacy, California, where I'm from, has designated 3 state prisons to close thus far and shuttered a standalone women's facility that's on the Folsom Prison property, as well as ending a lease at a private facility. And we've also shuttered multiple yards. So the prison population in California at its height was about 160,000, which is, of course, incredibly dangerous. And it's closer to about 90,000 now. There's a lot of work to do, but that's a huge change over a decade. And we anchor a campaign called Close California Prisons, working to shut down facilities like the California Rehabilitation Center, CRC, in Norco, Riverside County, where extreme heat conditions exacerbated by climate change worsen already deadly prison environments that we've heard about today. So temperatures there routinely exceed 100 degrees Fahrenheit in this prison, and they have about 5 fans per 100 people, right? So this is a prime example of what we're talking about when we say all prisons are toxic. This prison specifically has asbestos, lead paint, black mold, and a rampant pest population. It's a threat not only to the people who are incarcerated there, but also to the staff and really the broader community. Governor Gavin Newsom also made the state's prison system exempt from California's indoor heat safety regulations. So that makes the situation even more unconscionable. So that's, you know, again, not just people incarcerated, that's staff, healthcare workers, you know, anybody, everyone subject to this sort of collective punishment. And that policy should change. But as we just pointed out, that doesn't address the root issue, which is that incarceration is deadly, period. And we have to find a way to implement a new vision for public safety in the US. Air conditioning isn't going to solve the problem. The goal is to close CRC. And right now, close CRC and at least 4 other toxic prisons, which would free up over $1 billion annually. And, you know, we're obviously very invested in this issue, but the state's own nonpartisan legislative analyst office agrees with us. So it's not some fringe niche thing. We just passed a bill through the Senate and the Assembly of California by wide margins that calls for a reduction in CDCR's bed capacity. We're just waiting for Governor Newsom to sign it. So we believe at least 10 prisons could close safely across California, and that these funds should be directed into life-saving community services like mental health, permanent supportive housing, protecting our environment, and the creation of high-road jobs. And this budget cycle, we do budget advocacy, has been like bonkers, because we have the tough on crime narrative that we know is situated in racism and lies. Violent crime is actually down statistically, and even small upticks of property crime. We can really see the origins of that in income inequality and COVID-19, and even that has been like really drastically overplayed, mostly because we all have phones now, and sometimes these kind of dramatic smash and grab, quote unquote, robberies occur. They get captured, they get spread by right-wing media, and suddenly it's like, you know, this epidemic, quote unquote, when really statistically crime is at like a 50-year low. So there was that, and California also faced a budget deficit of as much as $68 billion, and we fought back because they were trying to cut billions of dollars from programs like CalWorks. So that's the California Work Opportunity and Responsibility to Kids program. Hundreds of millions of dollars for financial aid and employment services to California families in need. We fought back, and the legislature agreed with us, and they forced CDCR to commit to reduce their budget by $750 million over 3 years. And that's the first time in California history that that's ever happened. However, over half of that money, there's no plan of how they're going to get there, because they haven't identified prison closure as one of their priorities. Prison closure is the way to concretize those savings, which is why we supported such an innovative bill like AB 2178 that's going to inspire CDCR to maintain its prison population more comparatively with the space that it occupies and the beds that are available. They have about 44,000 acres of real estate, yet they complain that they don't have enough space for quote unquote rehabilitation. And as BP just pointed out, it ain't rehabilitating nobody. If people are being rehabilitated in prison, it's because they have taken it upon themselves to do the work that they feel needs to be done. So I also sit on the executive committee of Reimagine LA County. We passed Measure J with over 2.1 million votes, and that's successfully shifted about $400 million away from incarceration into community-based alternatives. We imagined this as a divest invest bill. It was passed in 2020 during the height of the uprisings. It's considered to be one of the models for shifting money into community resources, but then sheriff budgets keep going up and up, and this money is coming out of the general fund. So we see no reduction in police budgets and the sheriff budgets, but we are having some movement towards community investment, and jail populations are decreasing. So there is some positive movement there, but it's not enough to just talk about funding alternatives. Like, we have to reframe prisons themselves as part of this extractive economy that we've been talking about. So a decarceral just transition isn't just about closing prisons. It's about dismantling an economy that extracts hope and potential from our people and repurposing these facilities to better serve their communities sustainably, or just tearing them down and returning the land back to the native people. So in terms of advocating for funding, permanent supportive housing, non-carceral mental health treatment, and harm reduction services are woefully underfunded. We got to fight tooth and nail, because to some people, this is like freebie giveaways for folks, instead of like figuring out how to get people to a safe and stable place so they can be well again as the most vulnerable members of our community. So permanent supportive housing, I'm a housing first person. That's like a really, really big deal. And so when we say permanent supportive housing, we're talking about some real place to live, not temporary, not transitional, that also has wraparound services for mental health needs, to be able to work on getting jobs, to reintegrate people more successfully. So it's really about thinking in a whole person way about these issues, and that's really what public safety looks like. So yeah, all these prisons are toxic, not just environmentally, but socially and economically. And they're often situated, as we've established, in areas of high levels of pollution near landfills, right? Because it's America's trash can. Industrial zones, hazardous waste sites, extreme heat and flood risk sites. This is a place people put other people to forget about them. It's a place where people are disappeared. And the people incarcerated in these facilities are exposed to all kinds of dangerous chemicals, poor air quality. We have valley fever here. Asbestos, it's a mess. And, you know, this isn't just an environmental issue. Obviously, it's not just a racial justice issue. It is absolutely a public health crisis. And really, it's a budget crisis, because they telling us that they ain't no money, but they're spending $19 billion annually on corrections. That's just the state corrections budget. That's not the police forces or any of the other stuff. It's just the state corrections budget. $19 billion. They're telling us they don't got no money to pay for the things we know keep people safe, yet all of this money is being sunk into this wasteful system. You know, it's also an immigration issue. It's not just U.S. citizens in state prisons. The prison to deportation pipeline destroys family. It's real, and these cages need to be shut down.
Thank you, Brian. I might have a follow-up comment, but before that, I wanted to just ask if there's a way for us to receive questions from the audience, if the technical support could help us with that. So audience, if you have questions, please share that, and hopefully we can get them. I wanted to ask you to briefly tease out this prison-based economies situation. And specifically, I've been tracking the Prop 36, and I saw a post about some of the companies that are investing in promoting it. And I could say it, but I want you to say it, because I just think more people need to know about the interconnectedness of industry and prisons.
Thank you so much for bringing us into this space. And this is a horrible ballot initiative that's coming to the voters in November. It's called Prop 36. And what it does is roll back a lot of Prop 47, which was this big criminal legal reform when that was imperfect, but made a lot of felonies, misdemeanors, and helped a lot of people get into treatment. So Prop 36 is going to reverse all of that progress. And what's really honestly disgusting is that they're selling it to folks as like a treatment bill, but really it's forced coercive treatment when there is any, and all of the analysis shows that it would defund a lot of the mental health initiatives that are happening at the local level. So this is like really, really, really dangerous, and the people behind it are, you know, the usual suspects. The main contributors are SHOC, the prison guard, quote unquote union, a law enforcement special interest group, one of the most powerful special interest groups in all of California. Walmart, Target, Home Depot, you know, big box retailers. This one hurts my heart, and In-N-Out Burger, because I'd be loving In-N-Out, but we ain't going to them right now. What's really, really horrible is because of this pressure around this frenzy around retail theft and the pressure the governor and the legislature feel to do something about it, they already passed a slew of bad bills that changes so many of the reforms that we've been able to make over the past couple of years, increasing sentencing, making things more just dangerous generally for people, and criminalizing, further criminalizing things that we know are about quality of life and economic inequality. So, you know, even if you subscribe to the theory that, you know, these things need to be addressed, the state has already passed all of these bills supposedly to deal with retail theft. And this is just this giveaway to big corporations who are already lying about the shrink and loss that they're experiencing. They've been exposed in the press multiple times that the retailers aren't actually hurting as bad as they say that they are. And if you look at their profits, most of them are raking in, you know, record billions. That's not even to say, and I'm not sure about who's doing who's doing what, so I don't want to name names, but a lot of these companies use prison labor, and we have to acknowledge that prison labor, it remains a part of our economy. We have another proposition on the ballot called Proposition 8, which would end slavery in California, because we know that somehow we've allowed it to continue under the guise of mass incarceration. So slavery is still a real thing, and that's just a wild thing to have to say, especially, you know, sitting here on a panel with all beautiful people of similar skin color. This feels dark and horrible to say that slavery is alive and well.
Thank you, Brian, for expanding on that point. I'll pass it to Dr. Jordan for the next question.
So I wanted to know, and I can start, and then I'll pass it to whoever wants to jump in and give a response. But what resources would be helpful for justice impacted people to achieve or lead in achieving environmental justice? And I'll speak from my lens, and if each person could go around and speak from your lens, it maybe keep it at about like 1 to 2 minutes in your response. But I would say one of the most important factors to me, and it's not the most important factor, but it's my lane, and I know how to do this space well, is making sure that we give funding and workforce development opportunities to individuals that are returning while they're in training, while they're inside training, and where they're home training and placement. To date, we have trained, my companies combined have trained over 3,000 individuals, 90% of them of Justice 40 population, and over 60% of them have been justice impacted. That being said, workforce development is a deterrent to keeping people home. But also in the environmental justice space, one of the creative designs we were able to work with under some of the recent federal community change grants is to put earmarked funding for individuals to own and operate their own electric vehicle charging stations. Like, they're coming home, we train them to be entrepreneurs, we get them with a whole setup and provide that case management, wraparound support, but then make them entrepreneurs. That's just one example, but in my mind and how all things come together for me, economic justice is at the root of environmental justice. But anyone want to go next?
So I will echo what you said. One be, of course, training, and but I also say education as well. it's very imperative, that individuals are giving that opportunity, because with that opportunity, most people just want an opportunity. And that's what I think that the public misses when it comes to those that have made mistakes and might be incarcerated, whether they did it or not. An individual really just wants an opportunity. So, like you said, the workforce development, that's an opportunity for them to leverage and have a stepping stone, not a stumbling block when it comes to reentry. And I think also, too, what should be also, as Brown was talking about with the funding, they dump so much funding into corrections, but not education behind the wall when it comes to like Pell Grants, when for colleges and things of that nature. Statistically, and data shows that recidivism drops almost down to 1% when education is involved. So definitely education as well as workforce development. And one of the things that we have tried to do here in the state of Maryland is start doing job fairs inside the institution. So what that means is that employers go into the institution and do a job fair in the institution when guys have an opportunity to engage, and now they know that this is a pathway or this is a company that I'm able to connect to and then also transition into as I come home to work for. So these are opportunities that will prevent recidivism, as well give opportunities and successful transition back into the community. One last thing, and then I'll end here. Also, too, when Brian spoke about parent supportive housing. I think that it's important for actually that it be those particular like it be vouchers that's earmarked specifically for individuals that are coming home, so they can apply for those things and go through the process. So as they're like, let's just say 90 days out. If they're 90 days out now, the social services and stuff like that won't let them get their vital documents until they're like 90 days out, right? So that should be the time where they can start applying to for, or should be, or housing should go in, or HUD should go in and start helping them apply for housing at that stage. So by the time that they come through and they have employment, they can also receive not employment, but also receive a voucher at the same time to be able to transition into housing. So those are the things that I believe that needs to be in place.
Thank you, Curtis.
So one of the things that we're working on is developing a curriculum that will be shared with, and this is in partnership with an organization that we have relationship with here in Pennsylvania and Philadelphia. We are developing a curriculum designed to train and help our brothers and sisters who are currently residents, as well as our community, to understand what the extractive economy is and how environmental injustice is strengthened by the extractive economy. So we're talking about everything from utilities to our residents being used as slaves to do most of the maintenance, most of the building of furniture and et cetera, for prisons, washing the clothes, cooking the food, all of these things. Making things like in Pennsylvania, making bear traps, license plates, and also making materials that are utilized by corporations and companies. So we want to help people understand what that means and what that looks like, but we also want to understand what this extractive economy of the current utilities look like as well. And so we're working on that actively right now. The other thing that I think is really important is the housing situation. There needs to be a community of folk in every location, I believe, to build housing, to buy properties, to rehabilitate properties, or to build them from the ground up, where folk coming home from prison will have not just average or adequate. I'm not talking about insect infested, varmint infested places where they are unsafe, where our brothers and sisters are unsafe. But legitimate homes, legitimate places where people can share. And this is all a part of the restoration of dignity. This is all a part of the restoration of health and psychological health, emotional health, and competencies that we need to promote. So I think that's super important as well. And also, I think again, I stay here and I'm not moving, tearing down this negative mindset that the public has. We are talking about human beings that grow and change, and I always find it fascinating that people who've never been to prison can't stand it when they're reminded of something that they actually did days ago. How many times are we going to talk about this? I apologize for that last week. Why you bring it up again? I can't do this no more, right? And yet people love to hold something they have no actual knowledge of against people who they don't know and have never met. That's from years and decades and ago. And so the intellectual dishonesty there is mind-boggling to me. But so I think I stay there because this is something that it has to happen. So that's my focus.
Thank you,
BP,
VP.
sorry, BP, I want to invite you to share a bit more about some of the work that I know you're doing to change narratives. And while you're sharing, I'll screen share a flyer about said topic.
Okay. So in 2021, the Toxic Prisons campaign, our lead team was thinking about what can we do to get this narrative out here, to begin changing and confronting this negative narrative. And so we decided that we wanted to create a documentary. We wanted to have a film documentary starting with SCI Fayette, located in LaBelle, Pennsylvania. And that's about 45 minutes outside of the major city of Pittsburgh. It's the second major city in our state or the Commonwealth. And so we were able, through funding in partnership with Emerald City, in partnership with Frontline Resource Institute, to get enough money together to do this documentary. And so we partnered with really an amazing team called Bonfire Media. And we were able to put together this documentary, I Can't Breathe. And so the idea is to discuss many of the things that I've talked about here and that others have talked about here, and to incorporate the fact that people coming home from prison are full-fledged human beings. And so there's a variety of voices here. We have an attorney. We have a few of the founders that are a part of this. I am actually the interviewer for this documentary. A lot of great scenes, a lot of great statements. We pulled in a statement from Robert Kennedy at a speech that he did back in the 60s. And it's imperative, I think, that this narrative get out there. We would need to humanize people. We need to love on people. And we need to restore people's dignity and health. If we want to address this environmental injustice, everyone has to take responsibility for being a part of the solution. And so this film is going around in different places. We haven't made it public yet, so it's not on the streaming site. But you can certainly contact me. You can contact me personally and contact the Toxic Prisons Campaign through the Human Rights Coalition in order to have conversation if you want to air this or partner with us in bringing it to your area. Thank you so much, Doctor. Appreciate you.
Yeah, of course. I'll pass it to Dr. Jordan. I think we got a audience question if you want to ask this one.
I actually don't see it. If you see something, I
No
don't
worries.
see mine.
I'll be putting them on our shared agenda doc, but I can go ahead and ask it. From the audience, what, according to you, anyone, is a role of government and authorities in the creation of healthy and environmentally friendly communities for poor and underserved groups of populations?
I think there's nothing, and I hate to sound cliche-ish, but there should be nothing for us without us, right? Like, so when bills are passed and when funding is allocated, even when funding descriptions are written, so we'll say stuff about Justice 40 mandates for funding that goes to X percentage of populations that are part of Justice 40. But sometimes they get the federal mandate, which was written with great intentions, but then the agencies are disseminating it, put additional barriers in place so that SBAs or MBEs, minority business enterprises, and justice impacted individuals who need the funding can't really get it. So I think nothing for us without us. If you're going to create something, and some of this stuff is done intentionally, and some of it is just done out of ignorance. But when you don't have the right people sitting at the table, you end up with the same results, which are systems that just don't work. So nothing with us, nothing for us without us. There should be representation, just like the state of Maryland, where Curtis sits on the Lived Experience Council. I think in other states, they should have the Lived Experience Council everywhere. There should be an environmental justice coalition that sits under that Lived Experience Council where you would have representation as well. But again, the saying being nothing for us without us.
I would share a little bit about spending and say that CURB supports increased programming and education inside, but I want to name how shocking it is that many people's first experience with mental health treatment with education is often inside of a prison. And these services are really substandard. And, why aren't these investments being made in our youth and our communities before they are justice involved? Why aren't they a priority then? Why are we waiting until people are inside? It's also very expensive to do it that way. It costs $132,000 a year to keep someone in prison, and only 10% of that is spent on what they call rehabilitation. Newsom is also selling this new concept of incarceration called the California model. And this is based on the work that's happening in Norway. And really, it's a wolf in sheep's clothing. The first thing they requested was $360 million of infrastructure spending for San Quentin prison to transform it into the quote unquote San Quentin Rehabilitation Center. And really, it's a dangerous framework to think about creating kinder, gentler cages. And this kind of thinking can lead us to perhaps the biggest prison expansion in terms of budget resources since the 1970s. The California model also hasn't been led by currently incarcerated people. The panel that gave Newsom the recommendations didn't include people like the People in Blue, which is a legislatively recognized organization of inside organizers in San Quentin. And when some of their recommendations have been implemented, the state takes credit for it. So those are some things that the state absolutely should not be doing and really be thinking about, because there's this push to invest in carceral humanism at the jail and the prison level, and making these cages one-stop shops for the services that people should have already been receiving in their communities. Like, this money was already ours. And just to answer the question from earlier, because I think what people said was really important, I think we changed the narrative by lifting up the stories of people who are impacted, formerly and currently incarcerated people and their families. It's living proof of the harm toxic prisons cause long after release as well. And it's their voices that should guide this movement toward a decarceral economy where resources are reinvested into healing and resilience, not extraction and punishment. And system actors should be listening to organizers on the ground and not fall victim to this pull to the right that is infecting our politics of expediency in this moment and causing officials at the local, state, and federal level to invest money in police instead of people, and prisons instead of people.
So you have environmental and civil engineers that are very key factors in laying out the literal groundwork of a city, of a community. And they have an opportunity to stand up morally and professionally to identify with all of their research and all their study and all of their testing and all of their projects, the significance of airflow, the significance of air quality, the dangers of excessive toxins in waters and various lands. And so they have a responsibility morally, and I think they have a responsibility professionally, especially those who see this as a calling, to assist local and state and national governments in the way that they build infrastructure. And I also think that there is a need for us to look at our educational systems and understand where we are investing money and how we think about students and how we think about communities where students are. Also, I think we need to, the government has a responsibility to process the funneling of funds as it relates to employment, as it relates to who has opportunities and access. So for me, you cannot separate the building and the furthering of a city or of a province or a township from its educational stream. And you can't think about educational stream without understanding family. And whatever the notion of family is, people need employment. People need safe, stable housing, and people need to be taught how to live in relationship in community. I know we've abandoned that largely, but we need to get back to people learning how to live with other people. And so, that becomes really important. So the government has a role in all of these things, and the people that partner with government in the building and the furthering of cities. So we talk about everybody involved, all of the politicians. From a personal level, I think we need to revamp how we hire our politicians. But and I think there need to be some further screening for the people that we want as politicians. Um, and I was thinking about saying something earlier, and I'm trying not to say it now. But if they don't want me to work at Walmart, they truly should not want somebody with 34. Anyway, so there's a sense in which it is imperative for us to revamp how we process things out as a whole.
Dr. Jordan, did you have a question?
No, I know we're at the place where we're gonna
Okay.
transition.
Yeah, I just wanted to share one last comment. So I guess, yeah, towards this idea of, moving towards restorative justice and away from toxic prisons, I just wanted to share what I hope can be a resource for folks in this space from some of my collaborative research work with community organizers, specifically the Campaign to Fight Toxic Prisons, to develop a online public geospatial tool that visualizes a lot of these environmental burdens that we're talking about today, from co-location of prisons with wildfires, with flooding, historical air pollution exposure, things of that nature. And so I just wanted to share this resource. It's called the Toxic Prisons Mapping Project, and it'll be going live within the next week. So if you're interested in learning more about this topic and getting involved with organizing against toxic prisons in your communities, you can scan this QR code at the top to receive an email when the tool goes live. So I just wanted to share that with folks. And I'll pass it back to Dr. Jordan to wrap up the session today. Oh, you're muted.
Thank you. I'm on Zoom daily and always forget to take myself off of mute. But I want to just make sure I reiterate this can't be a one-time conversation. We have to have this conversation ongoing, because this one-time panel won't fix it all. Find a way to get connected to the cause. You've heard several different points of connection and by way of need, whether it was getting connected with housing, getting connected with education, getting connected with bringing resources to your communities. If you're a part of a faith-based organization, that get involved, not just with praying and things of that nature, but bringing resources and being a resource inside of the walls. We have an opportunity to change the narrative for people, but also for our communities. We can actually make a difference. I wanted to put these QR codes up just one more time. If you know someone that is justice impacted, we have free workforce development opportunities around the U.S. Scan the left QR code. If you just want to stay involved and know current trends, know when funding is coming up. And when I say funding, oftentimes the cohort that I bring together, because I know there's a disconnect between funding technicalities and being able to resource, we bring teams together that will write the funding for you, and you're just a part of the project. So if you're an organization, scan the QR code for Community for Inclusive Clean Energy for those underserved, because we can't stop the conversation today. It was imperative that we had it, but I want this to be a marathon that we continue down the road. And thank you all for tuning in with us today. And I want to show appreciation for every single panelist that was on today. It was a pleasure to work with you all throughout the preparation for this and for presenting such a, I believe, a well-informed presentation today. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank all of you.